The reference checks are more so you want to evaluate whether this is going to be a good cultural fit, whether they're going to have a good working relationship. So this kind of ties back to the last couple of episodes that we did in terms of cultural fit and getting over just liking somebody. It's also, the reference check is more so, how are they working? How do they interact with others? What are the other people's feedback? And you want to hear that from positive people so that you know, how can I actually have a good working relationship with this particular person?
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great Tactical Tuesday episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days we cover things like trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. And occasionally you get a micro drop episode from Matt where he shares something he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. Now, as a reminder, if you like the content that we share here on the show, make sure that you subscribe for more. All right, today's Tactical Tuesday, we are going to talk about all things reference checks. When is it best to use them? How is it best to use them? What is ultimately trying to be achieved with them? And so much more. So with us to help navigate this scenario is your favorite Tactical Tuesday co-host, Vivien. Vivien, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome back. What were we saying the other day? You've been on almost like 40% of these episodes or something by this point. Some crazy stat.
I don't know about the percentage, but I know that I'm above 50 episodes at this point.
Recorded.
I think this is the 55th one or something like that.
You're just not even, you're not a guest. You're a full-fledged host at this point.
Boop, boop.
Doing the dance. All right, so reference checks. We haven't really gotten into this one yet. So tell me a little bit, you're just like, oh, this will be a fun topic for us to get into. So yeah, let's just kind of start at the top. Like, why'd you want to get into this one? And then let's start teeing up the conversation based on what you think.
All right. So what inspired this particular one is actually my own experience giving somebody a reference. And it was a survey form that took me 45 minutes to complete. And they had a couple of rules within that form where you had to give a lower rating. Somewhere you can give 4s and 5s out of 5s. Mm-hmm. You had to give something a lower rating, like a 3. And then there was another prompt where they wanted me to rank 20 qualities, attributes from best to worst. So it felt like a losing situation where there was mm-hmm. nothing really, where this particular person is honestly such a good person, like a good coworker. I've worked with her, absolutely incredible. I wanted to give her a glowing reference. The format of the reference wasn't giving me that opportunity. And mm-hmm. so that kind of inspired this whole thought of, let's talk about references. And here we are.
Because that's just straight data with no context. So if you say best to worst, does that mean like they're bad at what's on the bottom, or they're just not as strong at that? It's something else. And again, the bottom of that,
exactly.
That's not an equal bar to candidate B, candidate C, candidate D. It's all so relative to other things. So yeah, that's interesting that they use that format there.
And it wasn't a linear kind of thing, because you can mm-hmm. be really good at multiple different things. Like it's not that I am exceptionally well or good at honesty, but then slightly worse at something else. Like you can,
because you're honest, good. You're not creative. Come on, yeah, it's like you can be both.
But the form didn't really let me kind of like actually paint an accurate picture of who this mm-hmm. person is as in their position, and whether they would have been a good fit for that particular role or not. And this is kind of what then prompted this idea of, what are references actually good for? Why are we doing them? What does a good reference look like? And how can you get a good reference as a recruiter or as a hiring mm-hmm. manager?
Yep. Okay. So start at the top. When are references being used, and when should they be used? If those are two different answers.
This I've seen a couple of different scenarios. So I know that executive search, a lot of times they will actually do reference checks before they submit a candidate over or before they even interview them. With executive search, it's always a little bit interesting because when C-suite leaves, there's usually a press release making it all sound like nice and fluffy and it was like parted on great
Mm-hmm.
terms and it just new opportunities, kind of a thing. And so with reference checks, you really want to figure out what actually happened. Is this person going to be a good fit? Because with C-suite, the stakes are a little bit higher. It's more public. And so it does reflect on the recruiter who's actually making those placements on the C-suite level. So this is where executive search tries to get ahead of this. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the time they will do this way, way earlier in the process to really, as part of their due diligence. That's part of the white glove service.
Yeah. Real quick before we move on to the other way, these references that they're using, are they typically asking the candidate, hey, who should I reach out to on your behalf? Or are they reaching out to former like leadership at that existing company? Or I guess, how are they going about those? Do you know?
Typically, you ask for references and you get specific contact points because it's a little bit tricky to get a hold of somebody on the C-suite level. You can, but usually when you're trying to like really find out the truth, you want to talk to some people, and C-suite usually knows, hey, like I'm gonna have to give them some kind of a solid explanation as to why this didn't work out. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times the candidates themselves will offer that up front and say, genuinely it just wasn't a good fit, it didn't work out, we had some kind of like differences in terms of strategy, it just was better to part this way. And so usually they will say it because they don't want to be in a situation like that again.
Yeah.
So usually this works out for the better. And I've also heard of recruiters that just call anybody that they know they've worked with and like reached out to them for a reference. And typically they get some kind of like blanket consent statement from the candidate of like, yes, you can call for references. And then they use that and just kind of like
Okay.
find who they worked with.
Yeah. Okay. So that covers the exec search side. What about just the rest of anyone who's not an exec looking for that extra role
So
that's going through the process?
So I also know that with very high turnover, blue collar type space, a lot of times recruiters will do reference checks before submitting them just because they're like, okay, why are you so jumpy? Like, what's going on
Mm-hmm.
here? Like, does it make sense to go through this process to place you, or are you a genuinely unreliable worker? They will usually really just genuinely provide like their previous supervisor and all that kind of stuff. And this is where you sometimes get some really interesting references, some juicy ones where it's like, I don't know why they listed me as a reference, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, thanks for giving us the heads up kind of a thing. So that happens as well, but majority of the time in-house recruiting teams, regular agency recruiters that kind of like fall in between blue collar and executive search, they usually do this towards the end of the interviewing process, around the final interview or before the offer stage. And this is essentially where they're just looking for confirmation that the hiring managers are making the right decision. You have to keep in mind that when candidates are giving you who to call for references, they know those are going to be positive
Mm-hmm.
references. They're not going to, I'm not going to list somebody I've had beef with in the past.
Yeah.
I'm not, like, if I really want this job, I'm going to put on like my besties that I have worked with, like some really great managers that I've worked with in the past that I still am on good terms with. They are going to go and be a reference for me, not somebody that I had a disagreement with.
You would think. Yeah. I'm sure there's probably some good horror stories in that. Okay, so they're stacking the deck in their favor, so to speak. You're not going in as a recruiter to try to find the gotcha. Like, this is only going to come out unless you ask a survey with questions that force someone to respond unfavorably to some parts of it. But they're going to say good things about them ultimately. What are the questions or items that you are looking at when you're conducting those?
With reference checks, you want to look at what was the working relationship like,
Mm-hmm.
not in terms of like what was the relationship in like terms of titles and who reported to who. If that, you want to see what was it like to work with this particular person, what feedback do they have about that, can they validate some of the projects that they worked on, and just kind of like do their due diligence. Because a lot of times when candidates give their references, they will say who this person is, what was their title, what was their kind of like reporting structure. and at what company they work together so that you can verify some of those like data points. But a lot of times you really don't need to. You can tell from the interview whether a candidate knows what they're talking about or not. And so the reference checks are more so you want to evaluate whether this is going to be a good cultural fit, whether they're going to have a good working relationship. So this kind of ties back to the last couple of episodes that we did in terms of cultural fit and getting over just liking somebody. It's also the reference check is more so how are they working? How do they interact with others? What are the other people's feedback? And you want to hear that from positive people so that you know how can I actually have a good working relationship with this particular person. So you can get some insights about that. And then the only thing that you can really ask to get to some juicy parts is like, what is the one thing you would want to coach this person on? This is where then you can find that one piece of nugget where the reference will say, I wish they improved a little bit on this, but they're really not bad at this, is what they're going to say most of the time. But they want to give you something because obviously not everybody is perfect. Some people genuinely have their faults. I did one reference check for one of the people that I have placed, and the feedback was, I wish this person reached out more often to me to stay in touch. I really miss them. Tell them I said hi.
That's hilarious.
And so this is where you can kind of tell, did these people leave a good impression behind enough that even when you're not in touch for years, that they still have very fond memories and thoughts about this particular person. That's ultimately what you want.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I'm validating some things as we're going through this right now. We're making some different hires. And so I just had a couple reference checks the other week before we sent an offer out to someone. And so some of the stuff in here, I'm just like, man, why didn't we have this conversation a few weeks ago? I'd love to incorporate it. And then there's some other things that it's so top of mind for me right now, and things that, what did I change along the way? What did I learn? What wouldn't I do again? What would I do hard, like it at a higher level, go more in depth the next time? This one's probably not going to be a surprise. Like, yes or no questions, just don't ask them. They're not helpful. Like, would you hire this person? Yeah, no doubt. Like, the open-ended was what really I found best. So one of the things that you said, like, what was it like working with them? That was one that I very intentionally just left very short and just shut up and let them start talking. I didn't want to give them guardrails on. Just, how was your work experience with them? See where they go with it. Do they talk about projects? Do they talk about their personality? Do they talk about anything and everything? But I found that was helpful to then use as second and third order questions to follow. And, tell me more about that project. What were they doing to get involved with it? And then, like you were saying, you can validate some of the different stuff, but it's a very conversational. So that was an interesting one. And then two other ones that I liked. I stole this one from Matt. It's like asking, well, what's their superpower? If they could be one thing. So kind of the other side, like I was still asking, I wish I had your question. Like, what's one thing that you would coach them on? I was just like, do they have any weaknesses? That's probably not a question that I should have asked, but yeah. So asking what their superpower is, to hear, is that kind of along the lines of like, we know what we want this person to be doing in the role. And if this superpower isn't a strong hit on that, then I messed up along the way in recruiting for this person. So making sure that there's that alignment there. And then you and I have talked about this in different ways with like email and communicating with different people. I said, like, any tips for working with them? Because at this point, we also know, like, they did well in all the interviews. I'm more so just confirming that we're making the right decision here and setting them up for success. So that was also a different way to hear. It's not a weakness per se, but if they're just like, hey, they're really hands off or they need a lot of guidance, that can also inform you a little bit some of their weaknesses, things to stay ahead of. So that one ended up being a very informative question for me and getting ahead of how to work with some of these individuals.
With those reference checks, was there anything that like stood out to you where you were like, this is exactly what I wanted to hear, and that's kind of what validated your decision to hire them?
I asked 4 questions at the very end. I was like, look, we want to make sure that we're setting this person up for success at the end of the day. Like, we like them. We're excited about them. We want to make sure that they're a good fit for the role. Now, there's some things at our company, Loxo, that are very important to us. And then looking at the skills or the traits that's going to be required for this person to be successful. It's rapid fire. Rank 1 to 10. You can do 10 for all of them. You can do 1 for all of them. You don't have to scale them out like in your horror story. But it came down to rank them in curiosity, figure it out ability. Like, if they get stuck on something, do they have the independence and the ability to go and want to go solve for that, or are they going to wait and just till I come out and help them? Their integrity and their work ethic. So depending on the organization, the role, anything else. So for this one, like curiosity and figure it out ability are very important to what this person's going to be doing in the role. But you could insert anything else. The work ethic and the integrity, that's more Loxo values and just doing well here. So those were helpful to validate a lot of the things. Like honestly, it wasn't so much hearing 10 out of 10, but they would explain it with concrete examples or other things. And that's what I got the most value from was it's like the rapid fire, but tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, that's perfect because, and we talked about this in a previous episode of just when you're going in for an interview, prime your brain to look out for the things that are important for that role.
Mm-hmm.
And so when doing reference checks, you just want to kind of like hear those things being validated independently without having to necessarily spell it out specifically. So yeah, that's actually really cool.
Yeah, good. All right, doing the reference check itself now. Mm-hmm. What should recruiters be doing? How long should it be? How should they be doing it? What medium? Like all the details.
Don't do surveys. That's just don't send surveys. Don't do it via email. Get on a phone call because you want to have a conversation with them. You don't know this person. And you want to hear these answers so that you know what's the tone, what kind of vibe are you getting? Because when you're hearing somebody speak, you can read between the lines to get a better sense and feel for it. Your gut can actually like get in there and help you make that decision and make a call. With surveys, it's very structured. You don't really see the human behind it because it's ranked behind numbers and stuff like that. And humans are not black and white. You can be excellent at multiple things and be a 5 out of 5, and you genuinely might not have a weakness amongst the 20 characteristics that were important to them that they listed for me to rank. And so this is where you're setting yourself up for failure and you're potentially losing out on great candidates. You want to get on a phone call. You also want to keep in mind that nobody really wants to be a reference. Nobody wants to spend an hour doing references all the time. And when somebody volunteers to be a reference, you as a recruiter and hiring manager, you want to be respectful and mindful of their time. And that is the best way to do that is through a phone call. Come in prepared with the questions that you want to ask and prime your brain to kind of like pay attention to those snippets that really stand out to you that confirm your hunch that you really want to move forward with that particular person. Or if you're using them as a tiebreaker, what do you need to know to break the tie between two really great candidates? Know that going in there and just be prepared and ask those questions. Keep it to 15 minutes maximum. Keep it conversational. Make them feel comfortable. We talked about this in another episode where don't just ask, hey, how are you? Good, how are you? But like offer a little bit so that you make a bid for a connection. Give a little bit of yourself to be vulnerable so that it's easier for the other person to share vulnerable information about somebody that they care about with a stranger. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of the reference. Be mindful of their time, 15 minutes, go in prepared, and just have a fun conversation with them. That's it.
Okay. So 2 follow-on questions. How many references should he be aiming to have for, like, is it, and I know this is such a, you can't put a concrete number to it, but like 1 usually good enough, 2, 3, like any trends that you've usually found in there?
Typically people ask for at least 3 references, 3 to 5. Whether they actually call all of them or reach all of them, that's a different story. I usually aimed for calling 3 different people so that I would have at least 1 or 2 that I can have like notes to compare it to and have a little bit of like a fuller picture. But 2, I would say at least. Sometimes you have to ask for 5 just so that you can get a hold of the 2. But you also don't need to call absolutely everybody. Yeah,
that's what I found. As I got 4 and I had 2 calls. One person I didn't hear from. One, it was going to be a handful of days. And then the other 2 were just like, yeah, let's chat today, tomorrow. And that was plenty because you get a lot of that confirmation early. Last question. Manager, peer, subordinate. Those are different types of references as well. Do you usually, when you do have multiple, are you going and trying to find different levels to understand what it's like to work with them? Are you leaning towards only managers? Any thoughts there?
It depends on what this person needs to be doing in their role. So if you are wanting to confirm what is your relationship going to be like as them being a direct report to you. You want to talk to a manager to know how can I best manage them and help them succeed. If you're going to be a little bit more hands off and you already know how you're going to work with this person, but you're more concerned about how are they going to fit with the team, how is it best to work, then you want to kind of talk to somebody who has worked with them. If they're going to be managing a lot of different people, you want to know what it's like to be a subordinate to that particular person that's going to be managing people. So it just kind of depends on what it is that you're looking for. Nothing wrong with asking all three.
Okay. I love it. Well, Vivien, this is a good one. I was like, oh, this will be a short one. Here we are, almost 20 minutes later on it. So, as always, appreciate your knowledge, appreciate your help. And yeah, that does it for this one. So, as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you like this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we have a link to the similar one, and you can find that in the show notes and description of your favorite podcast streaming platform. Full video episodes are available on YouTube. If you ever have questions, send them our way, podcast@loxo.co. And lastly, if you love this episode, please make sure to leave us a quick rating in your podcast streaming platform. It takes you 3 seconds, but it's going to help other recruiters like you to find us. All right, everyone, that's the show. That was a great Tactical Tuesday with Vivien. Till next time, bye all.